Keep well and warm with ESB Electric Ireland, proud sponsors of About the House.
In this year's series of About the House, I'll be looking at projects that highlight some of the common issues that householders face when trying to improve their homes. I'll also be looking at projects that might signal a new future for making our homes zero energy.
In Wicklow, I'll be meeting Alan Rossiter and his family as they embark on a project they hope will signify a cheaper, easier way of building Passive House standard homes. In North Tipperary, I'll be exploring how a small extension can make a huge difference. In Carlow, we follow Tony and Siobhan Holden as they hopefully move into their dream home at last. In Dublin, a 1940s bungalow is being remodelled to completely transform its efficiency. Whilst in Wexford, Brian Meany and Karen Daly are attempting one of the very first Passive House retrofits to happen in Ireland. And we follow the final stages of the restoration of the west wing of magnificent Rusborough House. In this first episode of About the House, we follow the story of Michelle and Joe Dempsey as they create the home they hope to retire in. They're taking a typically inefficient 1970s bungalow and not only extending it, but hoping to future-proof it against rising energy prices as well. I'll also be looking at the unique style of interior designer and shop owner Vanessa McGuinness, who is using salvaged furniture from all over Europe to decorate her home.
Joe and Michelle Dempsey have chosen the coastal town of Greystones in County Wicklow to retire to. They might have found the perfect spot, but their 1970s bungalow needs a lot of work before it becomes their perfect home.
Joe and Michelle have only recently moved back to Ireland. They came home to retire after working abroad for many years.
Well, Michelle, Joe, you've decided to live in Greystones. Why is that?
Well, it's near the golf club where we play golf, Charlesland, and it's near shops, and it's a lovely atmosphere.
We were looking for a detached house, preferably a bungalow, but not necessarily. And then we came across this house up in nearby, and we liked it straight away. We went around after that looking at other houses, but we always came back to that one. It was almost the first one we saw.
They told me a bit more about the bungalow they found.
I think it's just normal hollow block construction. There's very little insulation in the ceiling, and the decor inside was very dated, so it really needed a complete revamp. We were conscious that energy costs were going up, and we certainly wanted to make sure that when we moved in, it would be energy efficient.
What sort of budget have you got?
130,000 plus VAT.
Right, that's to do all of the work, finished.
All the work.
This 130 grand is not only to renovate and upgrade, but also to put on an extension of 25 square metres. The extension will enable them to have a much larger kitchen, but what's really important to them is bringing their poor BER rating of E up to a B.
Even if the whole 130,000 had to go on insulation, walls and windows, that's what we wanted.
It's going to be our house for the next as long as we live, hopefully. So we wanted to do it once and just get it right.
It's good to hear Joe and Michelle taking this sensible approach to where they're putting their money. But there was something that had come up during the course of the project which could undo the good work they're planning on with all their insulation.
There's some council land that the previous owners were able to acquire, and it was vastly overgrown. Joe's brother is a landscape gardener. We asked him to clear it, and we have beautiful views over Bray Head now.
This all came as a surprise.
It was a big
Absolutely,
surprise.
yeah.
All you could see was the shrubs and the bushes and the trees.
It was facing north and didn't seem to have any useful purpose, so we might as well put the utility rooms there.
Then decided we'd use the views by putting in the windows, but obviously windows aren't as efficient as walls of keeping the heat in.
The windows Joe and Michelle will now have on their house take up 28% of the total wall area. That's going to bring their wall performance down by around 75%. They'll have to really expand the levels of insulation if they're to compensate for all that glass. I came down to meet Freddie Miller, Joe and Michelle's architect, to see how he was dealing with this issue.
Well, Freddie, this seems a very challenging job you've got here. Can you tell us about it?
We're extending to the north side of the building, and we have a lot of glass in the north extension too. Being the north side of the building, obviously we're providing super insulated windows with a U value of 0.8.
Triple glazed?
Yes, because there's so much glass, and we're trying to reduce the heat loss through the glass on that side of the building. Obviously there's a trade-off between heat loss through the large sections of glass to the fantastic views the clients are now going to have to the north. So we're looking to insulate the walls, the roof, and the floor, and also insulate the new extension quite well too.
But as it stands, there's only 100 millimetres of external insulation going on around the house. I don't feel this will be enough to compensate for this huge expanse of glass. In my opinion, they need to either seriously minimise this north-facing glass or up their insulation significantly. Elsewhere, Joe and Michelle are installing underfloor heating in the living areas. However, they're only laying 30 millimetres of insulation, and that's not going to be enough to ensure their heating is efficient. When I come back next, I hope I'm going to see some real changes, as right now I don't think Joe and Michelle are going to get the highly efficient home they're looking for. A few weeks later, my team went back down to Greystones to see whether Joe and Michelle had been able to incorporate any of my suggestions.
It was very useful, Duncan coming down and having a chat with the clients about the levels of insulation in the house. I always felt we needed extra insulation in the floor and the walls because we had so much north glazing. And I'm glad to see that the clients now have 100 millimetres of rigid insulation in the floors and 150 millimetres of insulation in the external walls.
Reducing your wall heat loss by 50% like this only adds on average an extra 5% onto the cost of your wall insulation. But it was a different story when it came to the north-facing glass.
It's an important part of design of the room, that the room does focus itself out towards the views. So unfortunately, whilst we might be losing a bit of heat through the glass, the client still wanted to keep the views.
A north-facing aspect is something that many homeowners have to deal with. Putting in large expanses of glass to try and get in daylight means a huge heat loss. On the north side of a house, even an A-rated triple glazed window is 6 to 8 times less efficient than a highly insulated wall. At a north-facing property in Glasnevin in Dublin, a family had wanted entire walls of glass looking out onto the garden. But with only double glazing being used, this would have resulted in a huge heat loss. John McKenna, the builder, explained what he and the architect Gareth Brennan did to minimise this heat loss.
Basically sat down with the clients and the architect in question and went through how to upgrade and still keep the initial design in relation to glass. So what we did was we reduced the glass by 30%.
John and Gareth cut out areas of the glass at the top and at the bottom, reducing it by 30%. With the addition of triple glazed windows, this meant a big energy saving.
Did you do anything with the actual roof and wall insulation?
Yes, we did, yeah. We changed from traditional blockwork to a solid timber insulated wall with a render system, which also is waterproof and keeps in the heat as well from the inside.
What difference did it actually make now to the heat loss of the house?
We believe we've reduced the heat by about 25% in relation to running costs.
This is a big energy saving, but clearly this is still a large expanse of glass to have on the north-facing side of a house. At the other end of the spectrum, designers have come up with an ingenious solution called a picture window that is a great way of really minimising glass.
A picture window, or Zen view, is a smaller window that actually serves to frame the view. Although it's smaller, it highlights the view, as your eye is immediately drawn to it.
In Joe and Michelle's house, this would work very well. It would serve the purpose of drawing the eye directly to the beautiful view of Bray Head and cutting out the adjoining houses. But despite their decision not to reduce their glass area, hopefully the extra insulation in both the floor and the exterior walls will ensure that they do have a well-performing house in the end. I wanted to find out more about the actual insulation Joe and Michelle are using.
It's a Parix external insulation system. We externally clad the house with a EPS, which is expanded polystyrene.
The polystyrene is then covered with a permeable render in order to make it weather-tight.
Essentially, you're putting an envelope around the house. It's like putting a tea cosy on top of a house. It stops the heat getting out.
John explained why so many more people are now going for external insulation.
From 2009, once the SEAI brought out the grants, there's been an awful lot of more work out there, you know. There's a €4,000 grant available for external wall insulation. A house like this probably wouldn't have got the external insulation done. The grants made it possible.
Whilst it's more expensive and obviously not suitable for all homes, external insulation is the type that is most effective, as it's the only method that can completely eliminate cold bridges and stop condensation building up in the structure if it's installed correctly. Whilst work is clearly going full steam ahead on the insulation, work on the rest of the project has come to something of a standstill. Mark Whelan, the builder, explained what the problem was.
Building a house and putting extensions and renovations, it's all a system. One thing leads on to another. And this particular job, there was quite a large extension that went on to the back of the house, which had a good bit of steelwork in. The steel had to be in place before the windows was ordered. When the steel was in, the company came out and measured the windows, gave a price. The client was quite happy to use them. And we then discovered that they were taking a 2.5-week summer break. From a builder's point of view, it's a nightmare because the house is left open. So we're a little bit worried about putting in the solar system internal finishes because obviously the place not sealed up. There's a danger of stuff being lifted off the site or being damaged.
And it's even causing problems with the insulation as well.
Ideally, we'd bring the insulation back beyond the window ope and then bring the windows up to meet it from the inside. We can't do that now because the windows aren't here, so we have to slow down a bit on our insulation installation. Unfortunately, there's a big unknown just now. We can't even contact the window company because they're still on holiday until the 2nd of August. We don't really know how much delay there's going to be.
It's a serious hitch for the project, and one that could potentially jeopardise the entire schedule for Joe and Michelle. When I next come back to Greystones, I hope their schedule isn't going to be completely off track. But before I do, we go to Dublin to meet interior designer Vanessa McGuinness, who is pioneering a new kind of salvage furniture in Ireland.
I sell industrial furniture and also some vintage pieces as well. The industrial furniture comes from flea markets and suppliers throughout Europe. We would go off on our travels in a big van, we drive around and source pieces, then we haul them all back to Ireland and then we have them restored here.
Industrial furniture is a new concept to Ireland.
I would be the first in Ireland doing industrial furniture. In other parts of the world, in London and Paris and New York, it's been around for more than 10 years at this stage.
Vanessa is in the process of renovating her own house.
We bought an ex-council house a number of years ago, which needs complete renovation from top to bottom. When we bought it, it was in very poor condition. Most of the construction is finished at this stage, and we're now on to the finishes, the exciting part. I've been buying and collecting items for a long time. Every time I go on a sourcing trip, I'd always buy something for my own house. I'm just finding little bits and pieces to finish off.
After the break, I'll be meeting Vanessa as she looks for some of her flea market finds.
Okay.
And I'll be seeing her fully decorated and finished home. I'll also be back in Greystones to hopefully see Joe and Michelle's project back on track.
Keep well and warm with ESB Electric Ireland, proud sponsors of About the House.